We're going to go ahead and get started. So I do encourage you to have a pen and a piece of paper on hand in case you want to take notes and learn something new. And then we can have Q&A after this session. So at CLEO, as we spoke about earlier, our mission is to educate and promote an informed and engaged public that supports climate action. And as teachers in this training and integrants into our teachers network, that can be your mission as well. So you're going to help us educate and promote an informed and engaged public that supports climate action, particularly through the youth. One of the things that we want to emphasize through this presentation is that everything is connected to the climate crisis. The climate crisis is an existential threat that threatens the core of our very existence and everything that we rely upon. And so we want to start defining the climate crisis, but in order to do so, we want to understand the difference between climate and weather. Climate refers to the long-term trends, whereas weather refers to the short-term trends. One of the ways that we teach this to students is by referencing what they have in their closet. So weather tells you what to wear each day. For instance, if it's sunny, you can wear short sleeve shirts. If it's rainy, you might want to wear a rain jacket and some boots. And climate tells you the types of clothes you have in your closet. At the CLEO Institute, we are based in Florida. And so most people have a tropical climate and have the consequential appropriate clothes in their closet for this climate. Scientists that study the climate are called climate scientists, and 97% or more of actively publishing climate scientists, meaning that they regularly publish research, they agree that climate warming trends over the past century are extremely likely due to human activities. And these human activities are caused by our industry. And the more that we industrialize and expand our industry, we have seen a raise in carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere. And this is largely attributed to our use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels dominate global energy systems, and the United States is no exception. We burn coal, oil, and natural gas to produce electricity and fuel for transportation, heating, all of our industries. And when we combust these fossil fuels, they release carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And that exacerbates global warming. In the United States, 81% of our energy currently comes from fossil fuels, with only 11% coming from renewable energy. Now, these fossil fuels release greenhouse gases, and these greenhouse gases are important in a process called the greenhouse gas effect. This measures how climate is regulated on our planet. And the greenhouse gas effect works as follows. Incoming energy, mostly in the form of light from the sun, enters the atmosphere and is absorbed by the earth. And many things on our earth use this sunlight for their life processes, like our plants. The outgoing energy, mostly in the form of heat or infrared, is trapped by the greenhouse gases. And these greenhouse gases, which exist in the thin blue line surrounding Earth, help keep our planet warm. So normally, the greenhouse gas effect is a good thing. It ensures that we don't live on a frozen tundra. But the greenhouse gas effect has been intensifying because as the heat is being reflected back into outer space, it is being trapped by an increasing amount of greenhouse gases. These greenhouse gases absorb the outgoing heat, and thus we continue to see increasing temperatures in our atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels is one of the most important measures that we use to analyze how our climate is doing. This is an important chart on your screen. And it is colloquially known as the hockey stick graph because of the shape that it takes right around here, where it spikes really quickly. This chart measures the carbon dioxide levels over the past 800,000 years. And as you can see on the chart, it fluctuates naturally. It goes up and down and up and down over millennia. For millennia, the atmospheric carbon dioxide had never been above this red line, which is at 300 parts per million. And somewhere around the 1950s, we started crossing this safe threshold, and we are currently here at 414 parts per million. This is a level that we have not seen in human history before. And as we see carbon dioxide levels increase, we're going to see these temperatures correlate and increase as well. Now, these natural fluctuations are exactly that. They're natural. They're caused by changes in the Earth's orbit and tilts and volcanic eruptions, solar activity. So these are these natural fluctuations. But human activity has increased the carbon dioxide levels to here, and that is not attributed to natural activity. Overall, the Earth is getting hotter, and the last 5 years have been the hottest on record. And so now we're going to get into the impacts part of our presentation. And what is happening to the Earth's ice? Well, we know that when temperatures warm, ice melts. We have two particular kinds of land ice on our planet. We have land ice and sea ice. Land ice includes ice sheets and glaciers, and when these melt, it directly contributes to sea level rise. When sea ice melts, which includes frozen seawater and icebergs, it does not contribute to sea level rise because it's already in the sea. But what it does do is it opens up more ocean, and thus it allows the ocean a larger capacity to absorb light and heat. This effect of ice to bounce back and radiate sunlight is called the albedo effect. And one of the ways to remember that is if you've ever been told on a hot day to wear a white shirt or white clothing instead of black. Well, white, like ice, reflects sunlight, so it keeps you cooler. Dark, like our deep ocean, absorbs sunlight, and it results in warmer temperatures. So this is the comparison between our declining Arctic sea ice from 1984 to 2016. Oceans have absorbed about 93% of excess heat caused by greenhouse gases. And this is leading to a decline in oxygen concentrations and ocean acidification. For those of us located in South Florida on the call, sea level rise is a large threat in our region, as well as in multiple parts around the country and the globe. By 2050, scientific models are predicting more than 2 feet of sea level rise. And by 2100, 8 to 10 feet of sea level rise cannot be ruled out. This is what Miami-Dade County looks like today. And this is what it would look like with 8 feet of sea level rise. South Florida overall is a very low-lying region. So we do have a large threat with sea level rise. Okay. And this is what the state of Florida would look like as well. As you can see, South Florida has largely disappeared underwater. Saltwater intrusion is also a unique impact in South Florida. Most of South Florida gets its drinking water from under the ground. These underground supplies include the Biscayne Aquifer. And we have been seeing an increase of brackish water and salt water entering our freshwater drinking supplies. Now, this is going to threaten our drinking water, and it's particularly going to threaten our marginalized communities. With saltwater intrusion, we are predicting drinking water to be more expensive, and it's going to impact people disproportionately. So we do have some desalinization plants, which take out the salt and the brackish water from the fresh water, but it is very expensive. And we also have the capacity to move wells and build them inland, but that is also a very expensive process. So in the meantime, we are going to see disproportionate impacts. Extreme weather is also a threat. We know that warmer water contributes to stronger hurricanes. So stronger and larger hurricanes are predicted, and they bring about more rainfall, stronger storm surges, and overall larger impacts and devastation. Heat is also a large problem, not only for South Florida, but for the country as a whole. And marginalized communities feel the heat much more intensely. The US Department of Housing and Urban Development does not require air conditioning units in affordable public housing. And as we start seeing our planet rise in temperatures, we start seeing a greater demand for air conditioning units in order to maintain safe temperatures indoors. It also impacts people in regards to transportation. Many people rely on public transportation, walking and biking, whether by choice or by circumstance, and this puts them at risk. As you can see here in the picture on your screen, this is a bus stop in Miami-Dade County, and as you can very quickly identify, there are no shady areas in this bus stop. And it also results in higher utility bills as a result of this extreme heat. So as we start getting into, what is the state of the world as we know it, and what are some of the solutions we can start to implement going forward, we are going to come across the Paris Accord. And the Paris Accord was a landmark agreement reached in 2015 in Paris, France. And the aim of it was to curb increasing temperatures globally and address the climate crisis in a collaborative way. They sought to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. That's equivalent to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this 1.5 degrees Celsius might seem like a small number, but on a global scale, it can have devastating effects. And currently, we are on track to surpass that 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Now, the United States is the only country to announce its intent to withdraw from the Paris Accord. That intent to withdraw is dependent on the results of this general election in November. But we do have a responsibility as a global leader to be proactive in this climate crisis, especially when we have the largest per capita carbon footprint in the world. We're going to dive into the solutions, and remember, you can drop any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll have some time after the presentation to address it. So for the next 9 or so minutes, we're going to dive into the solutions. Solutions fall into 2 categories. One is mitigation. This would reduce the heat trapping gases that we release into the atmosphere. For instance, one of the mitigation techniques is using more renewable energy like solar panels. This reduces our dependence on fossil fuels and is a cleaner way to provide for all of our electric and industry needs without harming the planet and our health. Adaptation is a strategy where we adapt to the effects of climate change. One of the examples that can be seen in South Florida are seawalls. So seawalls protect land from rising seas and make sure that all of the property is safe from damages. Drawdown is a resource that we very much encourage you to check out. Drawdown is known as the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, and it proposes 100 solutions to reverse global warming. So if you are ever curious about what solutions there are, I definitely encourage you to check that out. They have a free resource on their website where you can see all 100 and all of the ways you can work on a policy level as well as on an individual level to bring about those solutions. One of the solutions that they advocate for is the way that we use our refrigerants. Refrigerant management is the #1 solution as defined by Drawdown to mitigate our climate impact. Refrigerants used in air conditioners and refrigerators in our cars and in our homes, in our office spaces, they use something called hydrofluorocarbons when they run. And when these HFCs are released into the atmosphere, they have a greenhouse gas capacity that is between 1,000 to 9,000 times greater than carbon dioxide. This means that their capacity to trap heat is 1,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's a good thing for us to focus on how we can replace these hydrofluorocarbons with less polluting greenhouse gases. In our communities, we also want to emphasize a just transition. As we mentioned before, the state of Florida only requires heating and affordable housing, and that is the case as well for many states in the rest of the country. And what we need is a policy change to require air conditioning units in affordable public housing in Florida, as well as the rest of the country. In our community and our home, our actions matter. And one of the ways that it matters most is mitigating our food waste. If food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest polluter in the world. And we do want to advocate for reducing our food waste. We also want to use the power of plants. And the lower on the food chain that our diets are based on, the lower our carbon footprint as a whole. So as you can see, we want to encourage more plant-based options. Now, you don't have to go vegan overnight. You don't even have to go vegan at all. But we do want to encourage you to incorporate more plant-based diets and start thinking about how we can bring more plant-based options into the places that we have potential to influence, like our school cafeterias. Solar energy is also a very important technology solution in Florida, as well as in many other parts. So we do have a comparison on the screen: parking lots in Miami, which are open air and uncovered, versus parking lots in Atlanta, Georgia. And as you can see, these solar panels do double duty. They produce electricity for the town, and they also provide shade for the cars underneath. You can go solar on your own, and if you're a homeowner, you can join a solar co-op. We can also advocate for more solar energy in our schools and communities. The Just Transition also advocates for accessibility to make sure that these renewable energy innovations are available for underserved communities. On average, low-income households pay more than 3 times their income on utility bills than the higher-income households pay. So this really can be a way to start leveling the playing field, so to speak. Mixed-use urban development is also a really interesting solution to mitigate the climate crisis. Mixed-use urban development essentially allows for a development like a building or a condominium to be used in multiple ways, meaning that you can have housing on the upper floors, you can have a supermarket on the bottom floor, you can have pharmacies and stores and office space all comprised in that same building. So even using the buildings that we have, we can use them in a more effective and efficient way. Now, composting is also tied to using land in an efficient way. Composting, what it does is it takes all of your food scraps, organic food scraps, whether that be eggshells, banana peels, watermelon rinds, things like that, And it creates a very nutrient-rich fertilizer that we can use on our farms and in our gardens, especially if we have things like community gardens. So composting doesn't smell if you do it right. You do have the capacity to compost in an apartment. I have seen successful composting bins on balconies as well as inside apartments, or you can also find a composting drop-off in your community. And if you don't have a composting drop-off, you can see if a church or a nearby school is willing to compost for your community and be a compost location overall. The important thing to note is that when we compost, we reduce the amount of organic waste heading to the landfill, and that reduces the methane gas, which is a heat-trapping gas, a greenhouse gas that is released into the atmosphere. And we start thinking about adding green. Where can you include more green in your life, in your community, on your street? You know, think of your house, your yard, if you have one, any medians along your neighborhood, office buildings, school buildings. Where can we start incorporating more green? We have seen the rise of green roofs as well. People who have more vertical space than horizontal space, they've been incorporating green that way. We also have green walls, which function the same. And not only are they aesthetically pleasing, but they help purify the air and keep the temperature around the green wall cooler. These are all examples of how you can incorporate more green. Couple of easy lifestyle changes. If you do online shopping, select the slowest ship possible. Make a list of everything you need and order it all together. Get moving. If you need to go somewhere and it's less than a mile long and you have the physical capacity to do so, we encourage you not to drive, either walk or bike or even use public transit, whatever is safest. Options are available for different electric alternatives. We do want to encourage you to be curious about all of the options that are around. For instance, if you own a vehicle or are thinking of owning a vehicle, we do have some hybrid options as well as electric. And making your voice count. Today is a momentous day, as I mentioned in the beginning. More than 99 million Americans have already voted, and if you are eligible to vote and have not voted, we definitely encourage you to do so. Encourage your students to vote as well if they are eligible, and if they are not, to encourage their families and their peers and their neighbors and their coaches and everyone around them that has the capacity to be that political voice, that they can exercise it. We can no longer afford to be disengaged. And lastly, when we start working with students, you can encourage them to use their careers. Green jobs are the future. In fact, solar panel installers, those who install solar panels on an industrial scale as well as in homes, it's the fastest growing job in 2019, along with technicians for wind turbines. So green jobs are the future, and whatever students are interested in, we can find an overlap between the climate crisis and their interests. For instance, they can incorporate green architecture, which is how to make our cities and our plans more eco-friendly. Renewable energy industry has a lot of openings, environmental law, sustainable fashion, chief sustainability officers for corporations, conservation experts, landscape architects, policy experts, community advocates like the CLEO Institute, and corporate social responsibility. We have a program at the CLEO Institute called the Climate Resilient Schools Program, and we would be so glad to have as many of you in that program as possible. In last year, 2019, we provided more than 35 presentations across 10 high schools. We trained over 1,000 students with a presentation just like this one about climate science, impacts, and solutions. We launched the Climate Leadership Information Program in 7 schools and certified 50 students as climate speakers. And they give presentations just like this one to their own peers, families, and clubs. CLIP enrollment is now open. You can email Gabriella at cleoinstitute.org. And we're also available if you have any questions on that. We would love to host a climate presentation for your school. If you are not in South Florida, we also do virtual presentations, and we'd be happy to share some climate literacy with your students. And so to close, I want to remind you that with every day comes a new opportunity to live the life you want and to live the life that we want to see for our generation and all the generations that come behind us. This is a picture taken in September of last year when Gen CLEO Youth organized a massive climate rally in front of the Miami Beach City Hall in Miami Beach, Florida. And we asked the city of Miami Beach officials to declare a state of climate emergency. And the public pressure was so successful that they finally declared it. And so the city of Miami Beach is now under a climate emergency. So thank you for listening to this presentation. We're going to go into Q&A now. So type your questions into the chat and my colleagues will be able to assist me with getting those questions.
We have a question here, Julieta. Are there affordable ways to get solar panels installed on homes, in homes?
Thanks for the question. Yes, so there are things called co-ops, which is short for cooperative. And essentially you cooperate with your neighbors to get lower energy bills in terms of the solar panel installations. So I definitely encourage you to check out if there is a co-op near you. And this allows you to get to know your neighbors and also make a stance that renewable energy is important to you and that community engagement is also important to you. There are also programs for lower income homeowners, for new homeowners as well. So definitely encourage you to check out what is around you in the area that you're in, and check out all of the people that are advocating for lower renewable energy installation and startup costs.
Great. We have another question here. Can you talk a little bit about the fires in California in relation to climate change?
Sure. So the fires in California, for those of you who don't know, have been very devastating. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs, have lost their income, have lost their neighborhoods. And we've also been seeing issues with biodiversity being impacted among the trees and all of the animals that rely on that and the plants. And we've also been seeing a rise in health effects from all of the smoke that is being extracted and released as a result of these fires. Now, these fires have been spurred by two main reasons. One of those is the climate crisis. So the first reason that we can explore is forest management and how we manage these forests. Now, this is a federal land. The California fires that have been burning are largely on federal land. So this is something that the federal government can decide how to manage these lands. And essentially you want to make sure that the biodiversity in these lands are promoted and that the soil is healthy and it's rich and it's moist, as well as making sure that there is a constant regulation of what is done with these forests. And the second thing would be the climate crisis. With higher temperatures, we have been seeing drier forests. Now the soil dries up, the trees dry up, and it acts sort of as kindle for fires. So anytime a fire does break out, it does have the capacity to burn for longer and be more deadly when the fire starts to spread. So the California fires, there have been talks about how it was, part of it was started by a family, and it was an accidental fires. Some of the fires have been attributed to personal actions, but the climate crisis has exacerbated and expanded the ability for these fires to intensify really quickly and to burn for a long period of time.
Thank you, Huli. We have another, it's more of a comment. She's asking if native landscaping, including planting Florida native trees, can be added into the presentation. I don't know if you want to quickly talk about just the importance of native trees and planting native in general in terms of the connection to the climate crisis.
Yes. So there are organizations that work on tree restoration in the city as well as on a county level. So native trees and plants are definitely important, not only for biodiversity's sake, but also for the climate's sake. We know that there are specific types of plants and herbs and foliage that absorb more carbon dioxide than others. For instance, here in South Florida, we have many palm trees, but palm trees aren't the best tree at absorbing carbon dioxide. So integrating more native trees and larger trees with more foliage would be definitely one of the ways to start getting a cleaner air and also expanding access to trees for more neighborhoods. This also ties into the social justice aspect, where some of our neighborhoods, particularly our marginalized communities, they don't have access to a lot of green spaces. So we have been advocating, along with many other community organizations, for more native trees and plants in those areas as well.
So Huli, can I add that native plants require a lot less water and maintenance than non-native plants? So another advantage of native plants is just that.
Thanks, Caroline.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Also less fertilizer, so you get less runoff and you get less water contamination.
Absolutely. We have a great question asking if there are any initiatives that you know of that are geared toward the adoption of circular economies. We didn't really touch on that much in the presentation, but.
Can you repeat the question, Olivia?
Are there any initiatives that are geared towards the adoption of circular economies?
Yes, so as far as the circular economies, I have seen most of the initiatives being pushed from a commercial standpoint. There are companies, we don't endorse or we're not associated with any of them, but companies' efforts like Loop, which tend to have more of a circular economy perspective. And so what they do is that they ship you containers with a product inside of it. Once you have consumed the product, you ship it back, they sanitize it, they refill it, and they ship it to somebody else. And so that way there is no waste on the packaging and the resulting pollution from that. We also have more of a circular economy when it comes to composting. So when communities compost, they can give that compost to local farmers to grow the food, and then that food can become compost later on, and that kind of circular economy can thrive.
Thanks, Huli. Next question, can you recommend any virtual field trips to learn more about renewable energy, fossil fuels, greenhouse gases, and climate change, etc.?
Sure. So I know some museums have been doing virtual tours. I recommend checking out as many as you can. Particularly the Smithsonian's are a good resource. We are going to have a lot of different ideas over the next hour or so with different virtual field trips that you can do, from Google technologies to other platforms that give you curricula and other resources. So definitely stay tuned, but virtual field trips are great. It just depends on what you want to teach. And we're also going to have breakout sessions later on in the morning about ways to integrate that. So you can also check out with your fellow teachers to see if they have any recommendations for your particular subject and grade level.
Great, thanks, Julieta. Sorry, the font is so small. I'm trying to read these amidst all the questions. Has there been any discussion on limiting population moving into overpopulated areas or a limit to all new multi-story buildings? This person's asking about Coral Gables in Miami in particular.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, has there been any discussion on limiting population moving into overpopulated areas or a limit to new multi-story buildings going up in Coral Gables / Miami?
To my knowledge, there has not been. What I have seen is that they're trying to use the land that we have in a smarter and more efficient way so that more people can share the same square footage. So ideally that would look in a way that has more affordable housing in terms of a justice perspective, as well as, you know, going up instead of going wide, so that we don't have as many single family homes, but more condensed homes. But I haven't seen anything on a policy level. Maybe some of my other colleagues can unmute themselves and chime in if they do.
Well, this is Caroline, and I would just say the opposite of that is probably likely down here in South Florida, where we have the high ground on that coral ridge. And as Huli just mentioned, the plan is to densify the populations on those ridge, to build up, not out. And in other parts of the country and in other parts of the world, the places that are more vulnerable have populations that are moving to the areas that are less vulnerable. So densification, unfortunately, is a matter of safety and survival for a lot of people. And this is one of the reasons why we need government totally involved in the climate crisis, to think ahead of these problems and to have planned retreat. So when people are moving out of the repetitive flood zones, where they are going is a discussion that they're having long in advance of that last minute call, because it is going to be a problem, worse problem than it is already.
Thanks, Caroline. And also, the city of Miami is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. So I think the population is expected to grow over the next 10 years. The Miami-Dade County's Office of Resilience has, I don't know if they've released it yet, but their sea level solution strategy plan. Caroline, has it been released yet?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah. But when they do, it will talk a lot about different adaptation strategies that they would like to put into place in the next decades in order to protect residents of our area. So that's something to look out for. And you can find their website. While I'm still sifting through questions, I can drop the link into the chat so you can take a better look at what the Office of Resilience does and some of their plans that are going to be released soon.
And we're going to talk a little bit about climate gentrification later, but I want you to think about that. When you think about the high ground becoming more desirable, what you have is a tendency for developers and wealthy homeowners to want to move into that higher ground. And to do so, they often have to displace existing communities. So a term called climate gentrification has taken off in the last decade to talk about accelerated gentrification due to climate, sea level rise, and high ground.
Thanks, Caroline. We have one last question here. It's what are some of the ways to get environmental club students involved in climate change activism?
Yes, so we are going to have many ideas on what that activism is going to look like in our lightning talk session, which is going to get started after a short break, after we finish Q&A in just a few moments. So stay tuned for all of that. But in the meantime, we can encourage all of these students to get involved with our youth advocacy program. It's called CLEO. It's a free program available throughout the state of Florida, but we also welcome you wherever you are in the country or even outside of the country if you'd like to be a part of it. We have a monthly meeting actually tomorrow on November 4th, where we're going to be sort of sharing our thoughts about how the election went. We are a nonpartisan organization, but we know that our students have a lot of feelings about how this election cycle went. So we want to provide a safe space for them to share that. And also we're going to start making plans on how we can reach out to these new elected officials, you know, regardless of their a political party, we want to encourage climate action to be a priority for them. So definitely encourage you to get involved with the Gen CLEO movement. That's available on our website. We also encourage you to check out our climate presentations and invite us to either come into your club or into your classroom at large. You can email Gabriella at cleoinstitute.org to set up a climate presentation for your team. We also have certified climate speaker opportunities where they can get trained on how to give climate presentations to expand the knowledge to as many people as they can and their peers. And there are definitely a lot of policy and advocacy opportunities that we'll explore in the lightning talks. So stay tuned.
That was the last question I had, Julieta. So I think we could probably move on to a quick break.
Yes, we're actually right on time. We have a break from 9:10 to 9:15. So I hope you enjoy your break. You can turn off your camera if you'd like. You can mute yourself. I'll stay on if any of you have any individual questions. And we will see you all back at 9:15 where we can get started on our lightning talks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julieta, I have a quick question for you.
I'm here.
I run a program in Texas for high school youth. And in January, I'm trying to do a climate panel. And so I'm reaching out to fellow women scientists and communicators around the climate change. And I'm looking for other people who might want to get involved in the climate panel. Is that something that your organization does, or do you just try and keep it strictly to your own education platform?
We collaborate with many opportunities, and we have been on panels and symposiums and conferences and live streams. So we would love to be considered. So what you can do in that case is to send us an email. We have an info email, which is info@cleoinstitute.org. And you can share as much information as you have about that, the date, the time, the purpose, the audience, what you would need from us, and we can share that with the team and assess whether that's something that we can contribute to. But thank you so much for considering us.
Thank you.
Right, y'all, just to reiterate, you have about 3 minutes left on your break. We will see you back shortly.
Hi, Julieta, I have a question. Does the CLEO Institute address weather modification and cloud seeding?
From my knowledge, no. So these are technologies that I personally am fascinated by. So I have done, my own reading and research and webinars associated to that. But I don't think that we've done any policy work or educational work through that. It's a very emerging technology. But if we do have other CLEO staff on the line that may be able to chime in if they have seen anything about geoengineering.
That's not my topic of expertise for sure. And like you said, it's emerging and some of the technologies are pretty controversial. It's not something we usually broach. I think at CLEO, we try and we try to talk about policies and solutions that are accessible and that we know we can immediately pass or immediately, get behind in order to move the needle on climate policy. But that's not my field of expertise.
So there are really just two main areas for geoengineering. One is carbon capture and sequestration, and the other is radiation management. So the things that they're really trying to do at scale are very, very difficult. We do not want to put satellite mirrors in space to reflect the incoming light. That, it's a good thought. However, it could lead to incredibly dangerous unintended outcomes. So radiation management is an idea, but really nothing people want to dive into. Carbon capture and sequestration is much more of a necessity. If we capture the carbon at the source of extraction of natural gas, it's easier. but capturing it from the big atmosphere and sequestering it is a little bit more challenging. So you could look it up. There are a lot of details on the return on investment for these geoengineering ideas and which ones could be scaled to be effective. So far, there are no silver bullets.
I've dropped a link in the chat regarding a video on geoengineering that came out in the last week or so. And as we've discussed, it is definitely not a silver bullet, but the video goes into more detail on some specifics.
Thank you, Ian.
Mm-hmm. I did not make the video. I wish I had, because it's beautiful. I'll be back.
All right, everyone, start making your way back into the main room. We're going to start our next session in just a few moments. Okay, last call to make your way back into the main room. Well, thank you all for your participation and engagement over this last hour. We're going to change from my voice into other voices so that you can hear from different perspectives. We're entering a session called our lightning talks. And lightning talks are small presentations. The first 3 are going to be 10 minutes each, and the fourth one is going to be 15 minutes. So you will hear from Leopoldo Linas, who is a current educator. You're also going to hear from Carolyn Burns, a current educator, as well as the CLEO staff. I'll be back to share a couple of ideas from a program that we held virtually this summer called the Climate Action Lab. And lastly, we'll close out with Ruthie Gold from the Yale program on climate communications. So if you have any questions, again, make sure to put them in the chat. We ask that you stay muted throughout this session, and then we'll go into our remaining activities. So if you haven't already, make sure to rename yourself with the words, the letters ES in front of your name if you teach elementary school, MS if you teach middle school, and HS if you teach high school. If you are here for professional development hours, we are going to need your first and last name to be entirely visible in your Zoom profile. Without further ado, let's take it on to our next speaker. His name is Leopoldo Linas. He's an educator at Palmer Trinity in Miami, Florida. Leopoldo, when you're ready, you have the floor and you should have screen sharing capacities enabled.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to make sure I do a good job. And like you said, the goal of today's professional development is to walk out of here with kind of like a lesson ready to go. just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, and you're seeing my presentation. Perfect, thank you. All right, I would highly recommend bringing a speaker from the CLEO Institute, but let's say you don't have the time for that. You are just last minute putting this together. I would highly recommend using Our Climate, Our Future, which is a video experience that educates young people about the science of climate change, right? It empowers them to take action, and it gives them an overview of the science, the impact, and the solution. It's a 40-minute. Yes.
So sorry to interrupt. Some of our viewers are having a hard time listening. If you could bring the microphone closer to your mouth, that would be very much appreciated.
All right, thanks for letting me know.
Proceed.
So it's a really good video that you can use. It has great resources, a lesson plan, a discussion guide, and a worksheet. If you don't have time for the 40 minutes, it also has short clips, the longest one is 6 minutes. So really good introductory video about climate change. And then, depending on what you teach, I'm gonna show you different ways to connect this first video with, in this case, art, music, film, poetry. I would highly encourage you to take a look at the Ocean Awareness Contest. The topic of this year is water rising, and it's challenging students to explore and understand their connection to water. The submissions respond to one of 5 prompts, and the first prompt is about basically climate change. And it's asking the students, how do you feel the effects of climate change where you live? If none of this is appealing, you can tell them that there's a cash prize for the winner. Maybe that will encourage them to submit their work. When I first started talking with my colleagues about climate change and incorporating it into the classroom, our physical education teachers always said, well, you know, I don't know if I can connect it to my class. But I found throughout the years that talking about how climate change is affecting summer sports, how now we have high index days, right, that are affecting sports, how heat related illnesses, right, are the leading cause of death or disability in high school athletes. That is really driving a point home. So I would recommend looking at Climate Central, looking at this report, or even having your students go and see how the seasons of, you can see the graph changing there, how they're getting warmer and warmer when the football season is starting. I also like a lot this lesson by the New York Times called Carbon Casualties. And what I really like about it is that it makes it present, and it forces students now to explain to a public that maybe is not so aware of the science of climate change, to explain it to that public, connecting it to something that is happening right now, okay? Climate migrants. So this is a good persuasive essay for an English class, for example. I also often, talking with colleagues that teach AP, they've mentioned, well, you know, because of my AP curriculum, I do not have time to incorporate climate change. The good thing is that many of those AP classes are already incorporating climate change. And one example of that is the AP Spanish course is organized around 6 themes. 2 of those themes, global challenges and science and technology, actually lend themselves perfectly to talk about climate change. And in the books for AP Spanish, they already talked about some aspects of climate change. In this case, how glaciers are disappearing in Argentina. Last year, I became a National Geographic certified educator. and I would recommend anybody to take that opportunity. Uh, with regards to climate change, National Geographic has this really good lesson that the teaching approach of it is project-based learning. So here students are considering their behavior that is increasing carbon emissions, and are creating a planet pledge, basically trying to change those carbon emitting behaviors. Now, if you want to take a fun break, have your students design a solar oven. I've done it with high school students, and they love to just have a break and make some s'mores, but I've done it with my children at home, which are elementary age kids. And again, they love anything that has to do with melting chocolate and eating candy. But at the same time, you can connect it with renewable energy. You can talk about heat, you can talk about insulation, and again, given the kids candy, it's a win-win situation here. Now that if you have some students at home, this is also something that they can get the materials at home. It only requires basically aluminum foil and a pizza box. Someone was asking about virtual expeditions. And in the past, I've used Google Expeditions to take my students through a 360 scenes and objects around the world. In particular, I really like this expedition about climate change, where you can see the deforestation happening in Brazil, the loss of ice in the Arctic, how Venice basically is sinking, what's happening to the Great Barrier Reef with warming oceans and those loss of the coral reefs because of bleaching. So this is a really good activity. Now, what has changed this year is that I'm having the students, or will have the students next semester, make their own boxes to look at these images, because I don't want them sharing the boxes and touching them. So this could be a really good STEAM activity for your students to create the boxes, and even maybe create their own Google expedition if you know how to take those type of images and have the technology. I'm gonna end with 3 books or reading recommendations, starting with elementary and ending up in high school. I have this book at home and we read it with my kids, and it's Please Don't Paint Our Planet Pink. It's a story about climate change for kids and their parents. And it basically is asking the question, what will happen if we could see carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Okay, so instead of being invisible, it would be all painted pink. For middle school students, Nature in 2015, in Nature, this comic book was published. It's a 10-page comic book that examines the 25-year quest to try to get to a climate treaty. And it stops right before the Paris Accord. So it's a really good read for middle school students to get that entire overview of how nations around the world have tried to get an agreement to address climate change. And if you want to connect it maybe to art or history, or again, writing, you can ask them to write the last 2 pages. What has happened in the last 5 years, right? This was published 5 years ago. What has happened in those 5 years? And lastly, for high school or even for professional development, this graphic novel makes a really good work of explaining very complicated political and scientific aspects of climate change, and through the personal journey of this writer. We gave this book to our faculty over the summer as part of their professional development as one option to read, and the feedback was really good. I've lended my book to some of the students, and they like it. It's a long graphic novel, but I think students respond very well to graphic novels nowadays, so highly recommended. And talking about graphic novels, last year, climate activist Greta Thunberg appeared in DC Comics in The Dark Knight Returns. You might spot her there. She had a small guest appearance, right? But it's becoming mainstream. And what's important here is that now when we talk about climate change to students, we have to emphasize that it's real, right? It's a genuine phenomenon. We have to remind them that it's us, that we are responsible for this global change in climate. And it's bad, right? It's affecting us, it's affecting the planet, and it will continue to affect nature and society. But more importantly, there is hope, right? There is possible ways to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So with that, please remember, when teaching kids about climate change, give them hope. And I'm happy, you can reach out, send me an email. Like I said, I work at Palmer Trinity. You can search in Palmer Trinity website and find my email. But again, if I had to leave you with 5 tips, and I'm gonna stop share right now, with 5 tips, I would say to 1, focus on teaching about the solutions rather than the impacts. If you're starting, start with the solutions. Make those solutions personal and local so that the students feel that they can do something about it, and emphasize the importance of that collective action, right? They're not alone in this. You can connect your classroom to this global scenario, right? And the global climate solutions, and think outside the scientific box, okay? I showed you examples of art, of poetry, social solutions. So the science, let the video give you the science, and then connect it to your classroom. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leopoldo. It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's pass it on to Carolyn Burns when you're ready.
All right, so hi, my name is Carolyn. I work as a program manager for CLEO, and I'm also a science professor at Tallahassee Community College. And since joining up with CLEO, I have learned about this really cool resource called the CLEAN Network, and I'm going to present on all the different resources they have available for you. It's kind of a one-stop shop as far as that goes. So let me just go ahead and pull that up. All right, so CLEAN in this case stands for Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network. It's a website, cleannet.org. It's organized through the University of Colorado Boulder, but it's applicable all over the country. They have over 700 free, ready-to-use resources, and they've already been reviewed by educators and scientists. There was an article that came out a few years ago in NPR that was talking about teachers looking for climate education resources. And what they found was that many of those resources were not really suitable for classrooms. Many of them were put out by special interest groups, or they didn't really align with, what teachers needed to cover. And it was just, our modern information economy, I kind of refer to it as trying to take a sip from a fire hose. You get blasted in the face with so many streams of information, and the difficult part here is not obtaining information, but in determining what is valid. So that's where these folks come in handy. You can see all of the different partners where they put out educational resources and they help review them. The National Science Foundation, NOAA, that's Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Department of Energy, NASA, several different colleges and universities and their education departments. And it's not even just the resources to use in your classrooms, but they have webinars, weekly conference calls, workshops, entire lesson plans. So we have some, testimonies here about how helpful this is. You can search by keyword. So if you have a particular topic you want to cover, then you can just enter in, sunspots. If you want to look into, there's information about how sunspots are not actually a driver of climate change. Grade level. So if you're teaching a specific grade, then you can look for resources that will fit into that grade. And then also resource type. Do you want a lab? Do you want an article? Do you want a video? So you can use any of those different search terms, and these have all been tagged, so you can find them fairly easily. And this will include full lesson plans for multi-day lessons, as well as labs, printable activities. They have quizzes. So there's one for climate as well as one for energy. And there's even some that you can take yourself if you want to make sure that you fully understand the science before you go on to teach it. So we see, here, it is aligned to the nationwide standards. So if you're a teacher here in Florida, you may need to do a little bit of, searching to make sure that it fits in with Florida specific, but it does follow NJSS generally. And they have this really cool unit design where you can pick and choose from different activities from, possibly different sources, different grade levels, and put that all together. I do recommend you sign up for the STEM Flash newsletter. You're going to get this, it's a topical newsletter, so it covers current events. And this can be really helpful if any of you do bell work or bell ringers. When I teach, I usually use that as my opportunity to get current events, topics into my classroom. And so, I heard people touching on the California wildfires. So when that was happening, you would probably get a newsletter, and they do have them archived. So if you want to go back to topics you've covered before, or something that was in the news a year ago, you can go through the archive and find that. And they will have a brief explainer for whatever the current topic is, and then link you to resources within the CLEAN network. So videos, labs, data visualizations like the one Julieta had within her presentation showing the warming Earth. You could just include that in a lesson that you yourself produce. This is probably one of the most important aspects of CLEAN Network right now. They have gone through their resources, and some are already tailored to virtual learning, where they would have been compatible with virtual learning from the beginning, whereas others can be modified. As Leo was saying, have the lab where they look at it as you perform the lab if you don't have the materials to send them all out to the classes. Different tags are going to bring this back. They do have a link where you can go straight to virtual learning. And I heard someone earlier was asking about virtual field trips. You can absolutely find virtual field trips linked in the CLEAN network. And then things like video or visualization are generally compatible with online learning. And online readiness is a newer tag that they've been using in order to designate these particular resources. There's even a guide, and I'm sure that most of you are probably pretty familiar with this process already, but how to adapt existing lessons to a virtual format. And really importantly, maintaining active learning online. As we all know, it can be more difficult to engage with students when they're online. And so doing things like the data visualization and analysis, or watching as a lab demonstration is performed, can really drive some more engagement that, might be difficult otherwise. for you as educators, they have so many resources, and I've been taking advantage of these resources myself. In their website, they have a guide to teaching climate science and a guide to teaching about energy. I definitely saw a question earlier where people were asking about, specific resources for teaching about energy. These guides help teachers familiarize themselves with the materials and common misconceptions before teaching class. There's a term they call pre-bunking. So if you come across a misconception like the one I mentioned with sunspots driving climate variation, it's important to get out ahead of it. So rather than debunking an idea the student already has, you're pre-bunking and letting people know what some of those pitfalls are. I actually just sat through a webinar last week that was talking about why debate isn't a particularly good educational strategy for talking about climate change, because it legitimizes the idea that there are scientists who don't accept this idea when, as Julieta mentioned, 97% of working scientists do. And so it's things like that where it's not just the materials, but it's also the strategies to teach them. So that can be really helpful to go over before you even introduce it to your students. A relatively new one is culturally relevant climate teaching. When we talk about climate science, my background is as a science educator. But in order to make sure that students have a full understanding of, urgency and relevancy, we need to make sure we do link it back to their own lives. And many of our students do come from some of those marginalized communities who will be strongly affected. So this whole guide is NASA-funded set of climate science educational resources, and they integrate traditional knowledge, so native science about the climate. Indigenous people learned about these climate cycles and, sea level rise and flooding and how to be good stewards of the environment long before, culturally dominant narrative around climate change sort of took hold. And so as we talk about climate justice, we want to make sure that we also refer back to, Indigenous ways of knowing and respecting the knowledge and wisdom that people bring to the table, even if they're not traditionally trained scientists. For a lot of these webinars, you can sign up for them live. As I said, there's a weekly conference call, although it is during the day, but they get archived. So if there's a specific topic you want to go back and cover, like the one I just mentioned last week about how to teach controversy in the classroom, that you could always go back and rewatch those and take notes. And they do give emails for the speakers, so you can reach out to them. The folks who are running these webinars are very approachable. So speaking of, controversy in the classroom, they have strategies for helping to manage the discourse around it. You want to give students a way to speak on their own knowledge and have their own ideas heard. And at the same time, you want to make sure that they're not spreading disinformation, that you build up that media literacy. So this page is there to help teachers navigate the controversial aspects of climate change. And what I find really helpful is it offers concrete suggestions for how to foster an open dialogue with your students, or parents, coworkers, anyone who has an input into your classroom. This one isn't necessarily about rebutting those myths. They do have other resources for that, but some of the common themes are addressed in the teacher guidance section, such as the anthropogenic source of climate change, how humans can take actions to reduce it, and just how to navigate those conversations in such a way that people will listen. So there are guidelines and frameworks which they use in order to make sure that their resources are credible and reliable. Colleges and universities, a lot of them have outreach and education departments, and they provide some of the curriculum materials and the teacher guides. Some of them are also coming from government agencies like NOAA and NASA. And all of these resources, if you would like to submit a resource to the CLEAN Network, it gets vetted by experts, usually people with PhDs in climate and energy fields before it's published on their website. They do have some NGSS alignment where they let you know which standards are being covered. I'm sure that you're all also familiar with how to make, existing resources cover what you need to cover. But that's something that they're also offering. And it's based on these internationally recognized climate literacy framework and an energy literacy framework. And they do link to these frameworks so you yourselves can go through them and see, what is the idea that we're trying to cover here and what kind of rigor are we holding this to? So my current project is helping to adapt some from CLEAN and some CleanNet and some from other sources, climate science lessons that are focused on Florida and are specifically standard aligned to Florida. So I will give a little bit more information about this in the wrap up, but this is something that I'm trying to develop and I'm looking for feedback and field trials on that. So hopefully we'll be able to collaborate and produce some cool materials. And I hope that you all can use the CLEAN Network in your classes. As Leo mentioned, I'm going to go stop sharing. That's the end of my presentation. As Leo mentioned, you can use these resources across all different kinds of grade levels and content areas. And what's really cool is they have a lot more elementary resources. That's actually fairly new that they're trying to produce more of those. So you can kind of get in on that and start to see all of these new things that are available for you.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm going to go into my session now, but if you have any questions for Leopoldo or for Carolyn, you can type them into the chat. We have our colleagues manning the chat and supervising all those questions. And we can also do live Q&A once the fourth session is over. I'm going to go quickly into civic engagement. Now, I work a lot with students through Gen CLEO and through our Resilient Schools program. And one of the things that they really want is to feel empowered and to feel like they're making a change. And so today's presentation is going to be effective, interactive, and interdisciplinary tools to inspire civic engagement. Regardless of their age and regardless of the subject you teach, civic engagement can be woven in through all of the subjects. So as we spoke earlier, you have already received a climate overview. And if you are interested in giving, in hosting us in your classroom to give a climate overview to your students, we are more than happy to consider that invitation. So identifying the problem is the first step to launching civic engagement, because if you don't know what it is that you're protecting and what the climate crisis is, it's really going to dampen the capacity that you have to explain to other people why this matters to you. So through our Climate Action Lab this summer, which was held in July, we explored a lot of virtual opportunities to get students civically engaged, and we're going to be sharing what we did with those students. So one of the things that we did was the iceberg model. So once the students have the climate overview, they have the iceberg model, which explains different layers on how you can approach issues. And systemic thinking is really a hot trend among students. They really want to understand the holistic approach to a problem. So not only what happened, but what are the patterns, the trends, the underlying structures, and the mental models that are contributing to that. That iceberg model is available for free online, and you can adapt it into your classroom. We also did a Civics 101. So just like understanding what the climate crisis is, the students want to understand what civics looks like, what the local government looks like, who is in a position of power, and how they can contact them. So in this particular case, they learned about cities, municipalities, our county government, as well as our state and federal government, and who the representatives are. We also invited them to meet elected officials. This is Kathy Castor up on the screen, and we also have Ana Escamani right over here. They're two of our elected officials in Florida. And the students were able to interact and ask them questions from how they got started to what they're working on and how they can support legislation, all in a nonpartisan way. Nature is not the only thing that tweets, so you can use social media to your advantage if your school allows you to integrate social media. We did something called Photo Voice Campaigns in collaboration with the University of Miami. And photo voice campaigns are a way for students to share their climate stories through photos. So here you can see a more artistic take on what the climate crisis means to them. And they can share that with different hashtags, or you can share that on an internal blog monitored by the school. We also participated in online climate strikes. Now, if you don't know what these are climate strikes that have been moved online because of the COVID pandemic, and it also allows students to network with each other around the globe. They are led by Fridays for Future, which was inspired by Greta Thunberg, which we saw earlier mentioned by Leopoldo. So we created climate strike signs and we posted them online, and we shared a little bit about climate stories. And it was a way for students to decompress, have some fun, get some art supplies, and be creative. And finding common ground is also really important in the climate scene. We shared a Google form with them, and you can adapt this again to your classroom as appropriate, where it explained how to host climate conversations. And students were tasked with hosting a climate conversation with somebody they cared about. Some of them chose their family members, others chose their neighbors, their significant others, their grandparents. So we had all sorts of answers. And they were guided questions, you know, how do you feel about local and national climate policies? Do you think we can solve the climate crisis? You can make these as open-ended as you'd like. The important thing is encouraging the climate conversation. Telling your climate story is also really important. All of us at CLEO have a climate story, something that inspired us to do work in climate advocacy. And I know that all your students can have a story to tell as well. We want to encourage them to share their voices, because oftentimes they feel that they're not being heard, particularly if their family members don't understand the urgency of the climate crisis. So storytelling is a way that they can really take ownership of their story and of their narrative. And they can share that in creative ways, whether that's through a video format, a song, a poem, or an essay, things like that. Letters to the future. Now, this might be hard to read a little bit, but these are two letters written by our students. One is Xavier, the other is Brooke. And Letters to the Future is an effort through Cortada Projects. Xavier Cortada is a local artist here in Florida. And the assignment is to write letters to the future in 2100. And so they wrote letters to high school students, just like them in 2100, saying what they hope they knew and what they promised to do in order to make sure that the people in 2100 had as livable and as safe of a future as they could. So writing letters to the future is a way to also get personal and to bring home what's at stake in the climate crisis. We also can write letters, but in a public way. So letters to the editors and op-eds are a great way to get that narrative into the public space through journalism. So this is an op-ed written by one of our Climate Design Lab students called Hope in a Time of Crisis. And the students wrote these, we edited, and they they can be pitched to local publications, and you can guide them on how to pitch to local publications and do that kind of stuff, that kind of process too with them. We also have the opportunity that we'll dive deeper into at the end of the program to write an op-ed in collaboration with some of you. We would love to have teachers share, why they think climate education and literacy is important. So we would love to collaborate with you on writing an op-ed and pitching that to the local media. So we'll give more details on that after. Writing to elected officials is also a great way to do civic engagement. So here was a student named Gianna. She wrote to her municipal mayor about her concerns regarding composting and some of the natural architecture around her city. And the mayor wrote back, and she invited her to be a part of the sustainability action team through the city. So the elected officials definitely want to hear from our youth, regardless of their age, and they are very happy to empower them and give them opportunities to continue advocating for the change that they want to see in their cities. Telling your climate story can also work through newspapers and websites, and working with journalists to make sure that they cover the climate crisis in a way that's fair and representative and brings to light issues that might not be in front of mind, particularly issues of climate justice. And lastly, we'll get into the power of the people. At CLEO, we participate in a national and global effort for climate emergency declarations. These are declarations that governments and entities can pass, saying that they acknowledge that the climate crisis is an emergency and they're going to do whatever it is in their power to act as such. We've already passed climate emergency declarations throughout South Florida and Florida at large. So if any of your students are interested in getting either their school board, their county, their municipality to declare a climate emergency, we definitely encourage you to do that. There is a form on our website that we can share with you all where you can automatically contact elected officials in a safe way. And building a movement, recognizing that we are so much stronger when we work together, and understanding that historically, movements have relied on a small percentage of the population being very active and very passionate. Statistically, we need about 3.5% of the population to successfully change the way that our governments and our structure is run. So we need collaboration, but it's definitely not as overwhelming as some people might think it is. And so as we leave this, we just want to share a couple of pictures of our climate emergency strikes. This was one of our strikes that we held last year before the COVID pandemic. So we definitely could use all of your support in making sure that the youth feel empowered, engaged, inspired, and that their voice actually matters, because it very much does. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Ruthie Gold, who is going to share about the Yale Program of Climate Communications. Ruthie, when you're ready.
Thank you, Julieta, and thank you everybody for having me. I'm just gonna share my screen with you. Let me pull up my presentation. All right, here we go. So yes, as Julieta said, my name is Ruthie Gold. I work for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. And so I will briefly go through some tools that we have that are hopefully useful to you as you use them with your students. So first, just a brief note about who we are, what is the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. So we conduct scientific research on public climate change knowledge, attitudes, policy preferences, and behavior, and the underlying psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence them. We also engage the public in climate change science and solutions in partnership with all sorts of entities. So essentially, a long way of saying we hope to advance the science of climate change communication, help our leaders be more effective, and be able to engage and empower a public in terms of making good climate change decisions in hopes of driving climate change action. And so the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, or YPCCC for short, has over the years done tons of amazing research, collected all of this data around climate change beliefs and attitudes and behaviors, and has developed all sorts of tools. But until I came on with them, hadn't really been able to think about how to make that data and those tools accessible to educators and students. So that's kind of where I come in. My role is to help them think about how to make those tools and data accessible to educators and students. So today, I'm going to zoom through, no pun intended, 3 of our tools: Yale Climate Connections, Global Warming 6 Americas, and the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. Just in the interest of time, I will be moving through rather quickly, so please bear with me. And I encourage you to think of ways in which you can use these tools with your students, in addition to the ways that I'm going to be modeling and showing you. So I'm actually going to leave PowerPoint now. I'm just gonna pull up, let's see, just my internet. Let's see. All right, here we go. So our first tool or platform is Yale Climate Connections. Yale Climate Connections is the media arm of YPCCC, and far and away, I think the best part about the Yale Climate Connections platform is our radio program. So every single day, we produce a 90-second podcast about a climate change story. So you heard that correctly. Every day, a 1.5-minute story about climate change. And so we've heard earlier this morning about how storytelling is a really wonderful way to get students engaged. It's a way to make climate change, which can arguably be a very daunting topic to teach and wrap your head around as an educator or a student. Storytelling makes that a bit more accessible. And so you can see, you can search stories by topic. So another word that I've heard come up a lot this morning is the idea of relevancy and making climate change relevant. So you can do that through these stories, right? If you have a student who's really interested in the arts or religion or policy and politics or health, these are great ways to make climate change more relevant by finding stories that connect to topics that students are already inherently interested in. You can also, of course, just search by keyword, just using our little navigation here. And also another really great way to search for stories is by our locations and stations map. So also when thinking about relevancy, and Leopoldo brought this up, the idea of making climate change local. So here you can see all of these green icons indicate different climate change stories, different podcasts of ours. So you can find stories based on where you are. So making climate change local. And you can see these aren't even all of our stories, but you can see that we have stories from not only all over the United States, but really all over the world. So a really great opportunity to connect climate change to all sorts of topics, geography, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what one of these stories looks like. I'm going to zoom in here. Since I think a lot of us are in Florida, we'll zoom into the Miami area. And so this is what happens. Let me just shift this over a little. When you click on one of these green icons. So here we go. So you see the title of the podcast come up, a subtitle, and then there's actually a link to the story. So this is what the pages with the podcast look like. So you can see, you can press the play button right here. And if you scroll down, something that's really wonderful is that with each story, you get a transcript of the audio. So this is really great for students who, they can really have that kind of multimedia experience where they can listen, but also read along. Additionally, You'll also often have these further reading suggestions to connect to the story, more stories like the story that you happen to be on. So that makes this a really flexible tool, right? You can use this as kind of a do now activity or a bell ringer if you find yourself with a few extra minutes in class and just need something, you know, just to have a little discussion, fill in the time. Or you can really flesh out this story into a full-blown lesson using those supplemental resources and readings, et cetera, that are provided. So actually, this story I had chosen because I think it's really wonderful and highlights a really important climate change issue, which Julieta and Caroline already discussed a bit this morning, this idea of climate gentrification. And so it's called Little Haiti, a Miami community built by refugees, sits on prime high ground. As seas rise, wealthy people and developers are moving in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it for you, and I'll have the transcript up here so you can read along as well. And what I want you to think about is if you were to play this for your students, what is a question you might ask your students about this podcast, whether you wanted to start a discussion or create a writing prompt. And when you think of a question, just type it in the chat so we can kind of share out a little bit. So let me just turn my volume all the way up so you can hear. All right, so again, once you have a question that you think you could ask your students about this podcast, you can type it in the chat.
I'm Dr. Anthony Lazarowitz, and this is Climate Connections. Almost 40 years ago, Marlene Bastien fled a brutal dictatorship in Haiti. She resettled in an impoverished area of Miami that came to be known as Little Haiti. She says refugees worked hard to buy homes and build a community there.
Out of sheer resilience and determination, working oftentimes 12 or 18 hours a day.
Little Haiti became a thriving community, but Bastien says many of its longtime residents are being priced out as wealthier people and developers move in. She says climate change is helping drive this gentrification. Little Haiti is further inland and several feet higher in elevation than areas like Miami Beach. So, as sea levels rise,
those with influence and affluence are seeking higher grounds.
Bastien directs the Family Action Network movement. The nonprofit is fighting to ensure that development plans for Little Haiti include affordable housing and support for local businesses. She says it's critical that community voices are heard.
The homeowners, the business owners, those who built their neighborhood out of sheer resilience, determination, and sacrifices and strength and blood and tears must be part of the dialogue. They must be at the table.
Climate Connections is produced by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication.
All right, so I'll give everyone a minute to think about questions, and I'll kind of read them out as they're coming through. So already a really great one from Joy. What will happen to the cultural center of Little Haiti? That's a fantastic question. Give everyone another minute or so to type, and here's the text as well. What other questions could we ask our students about this story? Oh, thanks, Olivia. How does the city protect these communities and prevent this kind of displacement? How is gentrification happening in our neighborhoods, tying it back to their own lived experience? Yeah, Yvette, that's a really great way to connect back to students. Yeah, where will the residents of Little Haiti go? Absolutely, that's an extremely important question when we're talking about climate gentrification. Fantastic. Yeah, so these are great. Thank you, everybody, for participating. You can really see how this could spark, a 5-minute discussion or a discussion that really takes an entire class period. And you can see that these conversations can live not only in a science class, but this can live really well in a social studies class, or use this transcript as an informational text in an English class. And a lot of the stories can even be played in an elementary school class. If you're trying to kind of introduce climate change discussion there. So that's awesome. One of the things actually that that I'm working to do is to develop some activities to help educators so that actually you wouldn't have to do the heavy lifting of, you know, creating something like questions based on these stories. So one thing that I'm in the process of creating is a question bank of kind of general questions that can be broadly applied to all of the podcasts, so that that would hopefully lower the burden, lower the lift on educators like yourselves. So we'll move on to the next tool now, which is something called Global Warming's 6 Americas. So this is a pretty big hallmark of YPCCC's work. So what we've done is, over the course of several years and lots of data collection, we've identified that there are 6 unique audiences in America in terms of people's attitudes towards and beliefs about climate change. So we've got the alarmed, the concerned, the cautious, the disengaged, the doubtful, and the dismissive. And in addition to identifying these unique audiences, YPCCC has also identified effective messaging strategies for each of these audiences, right? Because you're not going to be as successful talking to somebody who's doubtful about global warming if you're saying the same things as you would say to someone who's alarmed, right? If you're thinking about effective communication, you need to know your audience. So this is a really important message for students and for you all, as we're kind of charging people with, you know, going out and bringing up climate change as a part of discussion and, you know, moving the needle towards climate action. Something else, in addition to identifying the Global Warming 6 Americas and developing these messaging strategies, is that we've created something called the 6 Americas quiz. And I don't think that we'll have time, that I'll have time to give it to you all right now, but this is something that I definitely encourage you to do yourselves and to give to your students. It's literally 4 multiple choice questions. And when you take it, it basically sorts you, like Harry Potter and the Sorting Hat, into which of the 6 Americas you are. So you would just come here, click take the quiz, super fast, super easy. And it's kind of a great way for students to engage really quickly, really easily in our research. Also, something you can do as an educator is use our group scoring tool. So essentially, if you download this template, you can input your students' answers for this super short survey, re-upload it, and then instantly, automatically, our algorithm will kind of give you this really neat, presentable breakdown of your class's data. So this could be used as a really great benchmark tool at the start and at the end of a climate change unit. It could be a really great opportunity to help your students practice data interpretation with their own data that they've produced as a class. So that's another way that you could use this data. Also, in terms of data interpretation, we have all of these graphs that go along with this Global Warming 6 Americas concept. The data is really current and up to date. This is from April. We've got these great graphs that you can ask students about. One of the activities that I'm in the process of developing actually is a data interpretation activity to help students practice with those interpretation skills. We've got this really neat graphic, and we also have all of these accompanying studies based on the 6 Americas. So this one that I really like is about messaging strategies. So again, here, this idea, this tool, the survey, the graphs, the studies can live really well, not only in a science classroom, but a math classroom interpreting graphs, in English classroom, in social studies classroom with all of these informational texts. This is also a really ripe opportunity for role play, you know, have one student be an alarmed citizen and be talking to someone who is disengaged. How does that conversation play out? And that's actually another tool that I'm developing as well. So lots of opportunity here for a whole variety of activities across different grade levels. And the last thing that I want to do, I'm actually not going to start with showing you the website. I'm going to actually start with a poll question. So I'm going to launch this poll. So take a guess. What percentage of people in Florida do you think believes that that schools should teach about global warming? So I'll let people respond before showing us our own results. Okay, we've got about half of folks have submitted their response. Give you 30 more seconds. All right, so I'm going to close the poll and share our results. Okay, so most people think that 55% of people in Florida believe that schools should teach about global warming. Okay, followed by people thinking 43%. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to show you how we can actually find the answer to this question. And that brings us to our last tool, the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. So these maps show how Americans' climate change beliefs, risk perceptions, and policy support vary across the country. So as you see, the question or statement that's here now, global warming is happening. On a national level, about 72% of the population as of this September believe that global warming is happening. And right now, this is filtered by county. But let's look and see what the answer to our question was. So let's find schools. Okay, schools should teach about global warming. And you see there's a whole list of questions about ranging from attitudes, risk perceptions, and policy beliefs. So schools should teach about global warming. Again, it's filtered by county right now, but I asked you about the state of Florida as a whole. So I just clicked states over here to change that filter. And now I'm going to come over here to the state of Florida, hover my mouse over, and look at this. 78% of adults in Florida believe that schools should teach about global warming. And if we look below that, it says +0 from the national average. So this actually is the same as the national average. As a whole, about 78% of Americans believe that schools should teach about global warming, which is right where Florida falls. So hopefully that might be a little bit surprising in a positive way for you all, right? And that's kind of a theme that we continue to identify in our work, is that, climate change often seems like it's this very taboo subject, very controversial. People don't want to bring it up and talk about it because they're scared of being, shut down or retaliated against or what have you. But in reality, the data shows that most people are actually quite open to talking about climate change and different issues around climate change. So the more we talk about it with our students, with our peers, with our family members, their community members, the more we break this kind of climate spiral of silence. So hopefully that can be a good takeaway for you all as well. And just because it is election day, I'm just going to show you this one. A presidential candidate's views on global warming are important to my vote. Color changed dramatically, unfortunately. And let's see what Florida has to say about that. So 58% of folks believe that a presidential candidate's views on global warming are important to my vote, which is higher than the national average by 2 percentage points. So, if you haven't voted already, let's get to it after this session is done. So that is all that I have for you today. I'm just going to pull up a closing slide or two. So as I've kind of alluded to, we're in the process of developing activities like the role play activity that I mentioned, the question bank for Yale Climate Connections. For the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, one thing that I'm really excited about that I'm working on is kind of a lab where students can survey their family or their friends using those questions from the opinion maps, and then compare the data that they collect to the Yale Climate Opinion Maps data. So lots of great stuff coming down the pipeline, and we'll make sure that you're aware of our launch when that happens through CLEO, and of course would love your feedback. And in the meantime, for new research alerts and the Yale Climate Connection site, you can text Yale to 444-999 to sign up. Thank you so much again, everybody, for having me. And Julieta, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Ruthie. So we have arrived to 10:18. We are due for a break. So if you have any questions for any of our Lightning Talk speakers, you can put them in the chat and we can address them since our speakers are all still on the line. You have a 5-minute break. Please be back at 10:25. Once we return, we're going to be splitting into breakout rooms and you're going to start diving into idea generating. If you haven't renamed yourself, please do so. We need you to rename yourself so that you can be in the accurate group and surrounded by peers that teach the same grade level that you do. Make sure to rename yourself with MS for middle school, HS for high school, and ES for elementary school in front of your name so that my colleagues can put you into the appropriate chat room. Make sure your first and last name are fully visible in case you are here for attendance and professional development hours. So we will see you back at 10:25 where we're going to go into our breakout rooms. Have a nice break. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ruthie, and thank you, Leopoldo and Carolyn and Juli. I really loved your presentations. It was awesome.
Thanks, Olivia.
All right, if there are no questions for Ruthie and Leopoldo, thanks again for coming. You are more than welcome to stay on the line, but you are also welcome to disconnect if you need to get back to your workday. So it was such a pleasure to have you, and we'll be in touch soon. Feel free to stay on as long as you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thank you.
All right, everyone, 2-minute warning. Start making your way back. We're going to start promptly at 10:25. I do see a question on the chat from Victor Galdo. So glad that you're able to join us, Victor. So good to see you again. So what we do want to emphasize in that transition is the concept of a just transition. So that while we are implementing new renewable energies and technologies throughout our communities, we don't want to leave anybody behind. So just like we have like the no child left behind kind of policy, we don't want to leave any workers behind. So there are programs and initiatives that aim to educate the people that used to work in fossil fuel industries and train them on how to work in renewable energy industries and to help them financially in the meantime. So I recommend you check out the Just Transition. There is an entire movement for that, and there are lots of organizations working to pass, different kinds of policies and implement different programs.
Thanks a lot. What is the name again? Just Transition?
A Just Transition. Yes.
Okay.
So that, that's all the financial components, making sure that communities aren't left behind. So our coal workers, our utility workers, that they don't, face the financial vulnerabilities of losing their job, especially now with the pandemic, where people are already financially vulnerable.
Okay, thank you.
So we have reached 10:25. In just a few moments, the team will release breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms are going to work as follows. You're going to have about half an hour in the breakout rooms to generate ideas. We're going to start with the visualization exercise that a CLEO team member will guide you through. That will take just a few minutes, and it's just to hone in on why climate literacy matters and really get to the root of what you want to see in the world. Once you finish that visualization exercise, you're going to start generating ideas to use in your own classroom. You're going to have some quiet time to just think to yourself. You can share in the group and share feedback once you're done, and you can revise your idea based on their feedback. Once we get back in, we're going to share ideas. So make sure to define who is going to be sharing the ideas once you get back into the main room. Now, the CLEO staff have already been briefed on how the breakout rooms are going to go. So if you have any questions, feel free to direct them to the staff. So we're ready to launch the breakout rooms, and we will see you back at 11.
Oh.
Welcome back, everybody, as we start to see everyone trickle back into the main room. I want to thank you for your engagement. We were just chatting in the CLEO line where our employees chat back and forth, and the conversation was so good that we decided to expand the breakout sessions 5 more minutes to allow you more time for interaction. So thanks for being so engaged. So we have about half an hour now to share ideas. And this is going to work in the following. We're going to call all elementary groups, all middle school groups, and high school groups, and you can share the best ideas. Hopefully you had a note taker, and if not, the CLEO staff that was responsible for that breakout room can call on anybody that would like to share an idea. So do bear in mind that we are limited on time. We had 8 groups, and we'd like to hear from as many people as possible. So we're going to start with elementary. We had 4 elementary groups. I can get us started, and the other elementary leaders can unmute themselves when they're ready. So
Julieta,
yes.
Juli, before you, there were some groups that were mixed. So are you going to call out the leaders also so we know exactly who you're talking? For example, my group was elementary and middle school. Or you can just ask, as you go along, the leader from the group.
So we'll just ask for our elementary general leaders, or maybe Gabby can guide us in this since she's the one who created the groups.
Great.
Okay, so let's get started with elementary and work our way upwards. So Olga, a member of my team, she is a 5th grade reading teacher. And she had an idea about debate teams and how we can use debates in class to explore the climate crisis. So Olga, would you like to unmute yourself and share for about 45 seconds your idea?
Yes, the way that I use they involve the children in the climate crisis is that they have to do research. We do this every Wednesday. The children are in charge. We give them a topic, and the children are in charge to do their own research, bring their own point of views, and have enough facts and evidence to support their point of view. So we divide the children. The teachers are just sitting, watching. The whole debate is between the students, and they get so involved, and they all bring. And then the way that we do it is that usually one person that is debating has a team that gets involved in a debate too. And I usually do it sometimes with the social and science teacher. And we do this because if we only present facts to the students, telling them, oh, 70% of the planet is losing, it has too much carbon monoxide, and then that's not enough for these children. They really need to get involved. We need to prepare them now. So we're showing them what the problem is. They analyze the problem, they look for the solutions, and then they will carry this to the middle school, hopefully to high school, and hopefully to when they're adults. And it works great for my kids.
Thank you, Olga, for sharing. I can call on Erica. She had an important message. So she teaches at Terra, which is a high school, but that's okay. She had an important message that I think would resonate with all of the teachers, regardless of grade level. And that's about communicating the climate urgency and the climate crisis while also communicating hope. So can you expand, Erica, on the teacher vibes and the attitudes that you mentioned?
Sure. Sorry, I had to move my area. So we kind of discussed in our group a little bit about what we can do to not only create that sense of urgency with climate change, but also give the kids hope and understand that there are things that we can do to make a difference. So I think what I was trying to hone in on is that kids, whether they're elementary, middle, or high school, are always going to pick up on our attitudes. They read us extremely well. I mean, especially my seniors in high school, they just like when you're having an off day, they know it. When you're having a great day, they know it. So I think that goes also with our lesson plans and our curriculum is creating meaningful lesson plans that we are excited to teach, that we can come into the classroom and have a positive attitude, or like my seniors like to say, like have a good vibe, and they can pick up on that, and they sense that we are enjoying it, that we believe in this, that there is a sense of urgency with how important we're creating this curriculum and how we're really trying to bring home this material, but also give them a sense of hope through our curriculum and being able to create something that is meaningful, it's important, that they can learn from. So I think also that goes with us educating ourselves as educators, joining these workshops that are meaningful and not just doing them for our PD points, but joining ones like these where we can all communicate. You know, it's kind of cool that we're all different grade levels here and we can bounce ideas back and forth off of each other. And just being with like-minded people in these workshops and people that have the same attitudes and belief system, it's kind of empowering. It makes me want to go back into the classroom and really start discussing this stuff.
Thank you, Erica. So it was a pleasure to have my group share. Let's go on to our second elementary school group. And it's okay if you had other members from different grade levels, but the staff member responsible for an elementary group can unmute themselves and guide the sharing.
Okay, so our elementary school group, we had a discussion that we talked about a lot of different ideas, but one of the ones that we focused on was a transition away from a large amount of food waste in our school and bringing in an outside organization to assist with a composting effort. Carla, I believe, was our note taker for that. If I can ask her to provide a little extra information, that'd be helpful. If you could please unmute yourself. Okay, well, we're waiting for that input. Essentially what we were gonna do, I believe the organization was Dream and Green, which is a local one here in South Florida. And as I recall, the discussion includes some information about how to make sure that the staff at the school are educated on the issue, because if only a single teacher, just the science teacher or just the lead teacher on the program is the only person doing it, it's not really going to impact a large amount of the student body and not really going to have the effect that we want. So working alongside that external organization would assist in making sure that there's a lot of outreach to not just one classroom, but to essentially the entire campus. I believe the last detail that we touched on was the idea if there's problems with getting that system up off the ground, coordinating with the school custodians, things of that nature, it's better to think about those problems ahead of time rather than have to deal with them as they come up. So that was one of the many topics that we talked about that we thought could be the most effective to implement in our situation.
Thank you, Ian. Let's go to our next elementary school group. So the CLEO staff member who had an elementary group, you can unmute yourself now.
Hey, I'm Carolyn. I had a group of elementary school teachers. Maria was our note taker, and she had a lot of great ideas about project-based learning and service learning. So if you would unmute yourself and just briefly talk about some of the ideas we came up with for that, that'd be awesome.
Yes, good morning, everybody. So something to add in, which I know we didn't get time to share in our group, is planning ahead. So spending time at the beginning of the year to plan across the school for project-based learning type of projects, because if not, then all the ideas won't come to fruition, right? So one of the things that we all came to a consensus about was that we want to make sure that we work cross-curricular work, with all our subjects. So someone gave a great example about sea level rise and how they're doing a project that turned into a STEAM project where the students had to build different things using Legos or floats to try to stop the issues occurring with sea level rise. She shared great essential questions and guiding questions that would guide that project. But she also talked about how that went into her social studies. We also talked about fourth grade, for example. We're doing a whole unit right now on natural disasters. And I shared that our school 2 years ago, we had our fourth graders plan the collection drive for the Bahamas relief when it went down, with the posters, the boxes, everything. So extending that, you tie in the reading, you tie in the math, you graph the things that come in. So once again, focusing on planning ahead, bringing in local people. We spoke about the Everglades, Biscayne Nature Center, the city of Coral Gables. There's so many different programs in our area, and just making sure that you map it out and then everyone gets to work on it. So what one of our colleagues shared at the beginning, that all teachers have to understand the importance of it. I think that that's key as well, because if not everyone buys into it, then it's not going to work. And you all know that buy-in happens progressively over a few years. Pardon the craziness, I have children. Buy-in happens over a few years, right? So it's not going to be immediate buy-in, but if one grade level goes strong at the beginning, little by little, it'll spread, I think, across our school.
Thank you both. So let's go to our last elementary group, and the staff member can unmute themselves and share any ideas.
Okay, I think that's our group. So we had a lot of great ideas, and we kind of merged them into thinking that if we had a like a young activist club or group at school, we could then use that group to spread awareness to the rest of the school. So for example, they could do mini activities or lessons on composting or recycling, and then they could do a hands-on activity, but then they could share that with the other grade levels so that we can kind of spread the word, and then hopefully other teachers would want to get involved with their classes and learn more about composting or learn more about what we can do. And so that, you know, through some kind of like Earth Club or activist club, we could engage the teachers and the students to become more aware, and then hopefully do some things that would benefit the school. So that was what we thought.
Thank you, Pedro. And if any of the teachers are interested in establishing that kind of team, we do have a program through our Resilient Schools called CLIP, which is the Climate Leadership Information Program, that does exactly that. They encourage and advocate for climate literacy and engagement and advocacy. So we do have enrollment open if you are interested in establishing a CLIP in your school. You can email Gabriella at cleoinstitute.org. And our program is now running virtually, so we do have the capacity to do that. Okay, let's go into our middle school. So the CLEO staff member who had a middle school group, you can unmute yourself now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabby. I'm a program coordinator at the CLEO Institute, and I had a middle school group. And we didn't have a whole lot of time to get into detail about one idea, but we did discuss an array of ideas, and I will let Ms. Friedman come off of mute now and share.
Hi, so yeah, we had a general discussion, and I want to talk about what the different, teachers, brought forth. So for example, Mr. Scott was talking about the model that they have set at his middle school, where they have a marine science department. The students are responsible for taking care of the animals. And they also are involved in picking up trash actively. So they're making the concept real, which is very important as far as bringing awareness. They also brainstorm about real life situations. I think that will be a great way of getting students engaged. Ms. Griffin also mentioned about in her reading class, she has a unit about global warming. Students are volunteering and becoming proactive to clean up the environment. This also creates the needed awareness to contribute to find solutions to the problems. Ms. Nipper, was talking about the Kahoot, creating an informational game that the students can do during class, with opinion polls to do with their families as well, and then create posters, that they can put around the school walls, to also bring the awareness that is needed. And lastly, Ms. Williams, she's a high school teacher. She was talking about finding the time to teach about global warming by engaging in students in lab activities and for students to brainstorm about possible solutions.
Thank you both for sharing. Let's go into our second middle school group. CLEO staff member can unmute themselves.
Why don't you just call on the staff, Juli, because maybe they were mixed.
I don't know those staff, so we'll just go into high school, and it might be that you might have had like an even array, so you don't know where you fit in. So let's go into high school. So CLEO staff member that was in charge of high school group, you can share.
I could do that. I had an amazing group. We had some great conversation, and a lot of the conversation revolved around making sure that the students feel hopeful about the climate crisis. So I'm going to have Yvette report back on one of her great ideas, and I'm going to have Jean-Fils report back on one of his ideas on how to bring climate into two very different subjects. Yvette?
Thank you. I talked about how we do climate cafes. And so the climate cafe, the idea is that the students have the opportunity to talk about their lived experience around climate. And it's not just us giving them facts or giving them activities, that they really have kind of ownership over their ability to talk about and kind of dig into how they're feeling about the climate change. We also talked about the emotionary, which is their way to develop words that help them kind of tell their climate story or their feelings around climate. And I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. The emotionary came to me from Breathe for Change, and one of their doctors, I believe it's Dr. Woods, is the person who originated that term, but we use it just to help the students kind of decide how they're feeling, whether it's hopeful, whether it's scared, and kind of connecting it to their lived experiences. And then whatever the topic is, whatever comes out through the climate cafe, we try and give solution-oriented action. So if they're talking about their fear of the carbon footprints and what's happening with climate change. Sorry, my bird is squeaking. We try and have them think about or analyze what they personally can do in their lives. And so also kind of thinking about what their families are doing, talking about, where is their carbon footprint, whether that means lowering or increasing their thermometers during winter or summer, whether that means their food impacts, what money they give to corporations and what those corporations are doing for the climate change. So we tried to make it an actionable item.
Great, thank you so much, Yvette. And Jean-Fils teaches math to 11th and 12th graders, but also undergrad, which is a subject that, is new for me in terms of bringing climate. So I thought his idea was interesting. Jean-Fils, would you like to unmute yourself and share how you do that in your classroom?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. There is no room in the math curriculum in high school at all to talk about science. It's difficult for a math teacher to actually carry this conversation and much less have debate or dialogue about that. So what I do, since I teach upper level mathematics, is I talk about functions. Well, functions is basically about relationship and variations or change. So that being said, right there, instead of talking about X and Y's, I could talk about cause and effect. So all of a sudden now I venture into mathematics modeling and system dynamics. So quickly we could call into, instead of talking about slope, I could talk about rate of change. What's happening? Initial states. At the beginning, Olivia asked us to do a visualization exercise to picture ourselves in the future. What we'd like to see? Well, we talk about initial states and final state. So can we get there? How fast? How? If not, what can be done? So with all of that, we're talking about predictions and prevention. So all of that in the context of mathematics. There's also a sense of doom, as I said earlier. 20 years ago here in Miami, towards late March, it was still chilly, but that has disappeared. For anyone who lives here in the South, they know that. We no longer have that at all. So it's like a furnace all year round. So yes, there's a sense of doom and despair and also skepticism, because we tell people, listen, we have 10 to 12 years to change the trend. But what if we don't? These are the questions they're asking. So my focus is to help people understand, my students to understand, yes, we could model this behavior. We could see what is causing what, and we could see what's gonna lead to if nothing is done. And we could see what could be done to prevent it, if anything. Now, it is not an individual thing, it is a global effort, but it's important for us to start on a local level. I also talked about our ability to grow our own garden in our backyard, move into green, clean energy, have solar energy. We are dependent on fossil fuels so much that it drives poverty. We don't have children playing outside anymore. I recall 30 years ago, children used to go outside and play. Neighbors used to sit out there and play. But guess what? As soon as AC was commercialized, everybody locked themselves into their houses. How does that affect us as individuals? How does that affect our immune system? How does that affect our ecosystem? How does that affect our relationship with our neighbors? And as a result, what do we see? Crime is going up. We may not see the relationship, but that's where mathematics comes into play, because it shows abstraction, how things are connected. When one thing changes, how it affects others, and the domino effect. Basically, in a nutshell, these are the things that I have shared in my group.
Thank you, Jean-Fils. Back to you, Julieta.
Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to pass it over to Natalia, a CLEO staff member who also led a high school team.
Wait, wow, you're an inspiration. I love that. And I actually had a math teacher in our group that also mentioned that it's difficult to bring this into the classroom. So, thank you for giving us those ideas. That's amazing. And I'm going to give it over to Eleanor, who is our note taker, and she can discuss the ideas that were brought forth by some of our teachers.
Hi, everyone. So we talked about the possibility of creating like a class unit on climate change and what presentations they could use, either with different variations of like presentation formatting, either PowerPoint or Prezi. The idea of having a poster contest and kind of like after the students have done their presentations to take it out into the classroom, making a panel, the possibility of a social media campaign, an art competition, a poetry competition, have the students who have done the research go into other classes and present what they've found to the other classes. In math, to track CO2 emissions and biodiversity loss, to start gardens within the school, and to sponsor cleanup events. The resources that we talked about that would be being used would be like school administration, and then going into the actual community, into town hall meetings. And then we didn't have an opportunity to talk about this, but I just felt like it was really cool. So I'm going to steal my opportunity to talk. The Arts Center has a piano slam contest where they incorporate math, science, English and music into all one kind of event. And it's a big competition for scholarships. The students whose poetry and music is chosen, everybody gets a free laptop. But typically the theme of their music and their poetry that they're looking for is about climate change. FIU also has a Zines for Progress opportunity where students are taken on field trips and looking at different they pick their own theme, and a lot of the times, like when my students did it, we did climate change, and they were taken on field trips. They created a zine. They were their zines were, what is it? They're in the FIU library for like all of time now. The mayor saw them. We talked about like they were able to curate their zines specifically to what's going on in Miami-Dade. They also worked with artists throughout the community, and FIU puts that on. You have to like apply to the program, but once you get accepted, it's completely free, and everything that they do is really just to help students become informed. So that's what we talked about. It was fun. Yay!
Thank you. Back to you, Juli.
Thank you for sharing. Let's pass it over to Yoka, who also led a group.
Thank you. Well, our group was very diverse. We had people from outside the state, also from Florida. The great thing about this group is none of these teachers have ever taught climate in their classrooms. So this has been a very rewarding day so far. And so we got into really robust conversations of what the world that we all envision, and we realized that we all want the same thing. We all want a more peaceful, with a lot of clean air, clean water, surrounded by nature. So that was a great, robust discussion. And so we were able to brainstorm a couple of ideas of how to bring climate into the curriculum. But what I love about my group is that the few cases that we were able to discuss all brought agency into the lessons. And so Ms. Milian talked about discussing global warming and using oceans also, and bring a town hall panel to the classroom, and inviting not only organizations that are based in science like the CLEO Institute and NOAA to talk about these issues, but also inviting elected officials. So she really wanted to hear from elected officials and being able to engage them in the discussions. So we thought that that was a great idea. And then Ms. Hood talked about creating a debate. Right now, she's actually having a debate because of the elections, and she thought of putting a debate together that both parties to talk about climate change and the legislative policies that they would be, they would put forward to try to solve the climate crisis. So those were two of the main examples that we thought were great. And we wish we had more time, but the conversation was so enriching that we didn't get to go into a lot more examples, but it was a great discussion, and I was happy to have those with my group. Thanks, Julieta, back to you.
Thank you. Are there any other CLEO staff members that need to share? It looks like we are right on time, so thank you all for sharing. I hope this inspired you to bring climate literacy into your classroom and put it into practice. So we are now reaching the end of our session. So we're so glad that you've stuck with us throughout. Before we get into our conclusion and what the next steps are, I do want to remind you, make sure to rename yourself your full name. We are in the process of taking the afternoon attendance. So if you are an MDCPS teacher and here for credit, the county has asked us to take attendance at the end of the event to ensure that you have stayed online. So we do want to make sure that you get the credit if you are still here. So ensure that you have your first and last name there, and ES, MS, and HS when applicable. So we're going to go into what the next steps are. So you have all of these ideas. You know, how do we first get credit for this? Because we do want to give you the credit that you worked so hard for your professional development hours, and also give you a couple of guiding next steps on how you can continue to network with other teachers. For that, I'm going to pass it over to Carolyn, one of my CLEO colleagues, to guide you over the next steps.
Hey, so I'm going to, I have a couple slides to just go through this. Let's see. All right, so the question is basically, what now? How do we move forward? And, you know, how are we going to implement this? So you do have a little bit of homework. A 500-word reflection on what was covered today, new tools or strategies that you might have come away with, the teacher planning workshop, the worksheets that Caroline mentioned at the beginning. Hopefully you did jotted down some notes and those will help you out. And just basically, what did you learn from this workshop? What is one issue from the training that really stood out to you? You know, as we, you know, Julieta mentioned in her presentation, climate change is going to touch on lots of different aspects of agriculture and human health and ecosystem decline. So what really speaks to you? And why climate education is really important, both to you and in general. So what was a strategy from those presented at the workshop that you found really useful? Maybe this is something that you discussed in your group, or a resource that you found in my presentation about the Clean Network or the Yale Climate Connection. And one additional strategy or climate idea that you plan to use. So I know that in my breakout group, we talked a lot about project-based learning and service learning and how to implement those. So you could just wrap that up, and a basic climate lesson plan. You are all teachers. I know that you write lesson plans, you know, every single week. And so something that fits with your grade level, it doesn't need to be complex. It can just be, you know, basically a one-page outline. You can maybe link some resources. If you implement it, maybe add in some pictures of what you did. And in order to make sure that, you know, you get your credit for attending and participating, send both of those to Gabriela at CLEOinstitute.org by November 24th. This gives you 3 weeks. There will be an email sent out later this week with all necessary information. So you don't need to worry if you didn't catch everything that I already put in the previous slide. You will be receiving that as well as a follow-up survey. We would be really grateful if you could complete that survey. And, you know, if you really enjoyed those breakout rooms, getting to know your fellow teachers and, you know, getting that collaboration and feedback. Oh, what did you do? How did you use this in your classroom? We'll be creating a WhatsApp group chat. This is an app that you can put on, you know, a cell phone or mobile device, and it'll create kind of a forum of CLEO trained teachers. So they can share news and articles and ideas and pictures. And, you know, hopefully as we got to know one another, you know, maybe you have certain teachers that you really want to hear more from, or you want to touch back, oh, you had a great idea. I'm really interested to hear about how you implemented that. And so that'll be a really good way to create that community. Once you have submitted all the homework and the survey, you'll get a certificate of completion in your email that you can use with your principal or district. And then one last note, I'm working on this is specific to Florida standards. I found that a lot of the climate resources, if they're aligned, it's mostly to Common Core or NGSS. And I'm trying to make this as easy and pluck it off the shelf and use it as possible for Florida teachers in particular. So over the next few weeks, I will be putting together these lesson plans. I've got outlines already. I know what I'm going to cover. And depending on which grade you teach, I would be really grateful if I can send these out to you. We have the emails of people who attended. If you would be willing to give any kind of feedback or try it out in your classroom and let me know, what did you do that might have been different? Where could I add to this? What were pain points that should be clearly communicated in the teacher guides? We will be sending those out, as I said, later this semester, and I would be very grateful to hear back from practicing teachers in all these different grade levels. I've done a project like this before on oil spills, and this is my first with CLEO, so I'm really excited to see what people think about it. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Carolyn. We're going to pass it over to Olivia, who is going to introduce an opportunity with our upcoming symposium. It's our Empowering Capable Climate Communicators Symposium. So take it away, Olivia.
Thanks, Julieta. So just before we move on to the survey and the end of our session today, I just want to let you all know that every year CLEO hosts an annual climate symposium. And this year we're focusing on the intersection of climate and health. And for any of you that are interested in learning more about this, we have some amazing panels. So it'll be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 10 to 1. We will be sending the recordings to anyone who can't attend certain sessions, and you do have the ability to buy tickets based on the days. You can buy a 3-day bundle, you can buy a 1-day bundle, and we do have a 50% discount for teachers. So I'm going to drop the link where you can find out more about the agenda and you can buy tickets. And I'm also going to provide in the chat box the coupon code. Let me just find my chat box here. So you can find this on our website, but this is the link, and we'll send this to you as well in our follow-up email. And I believe the coupons for teachers is, hold on, let me just, is this. That is, you can use that at checkout to get your 50% off discount, but I highly encourage you just to at least check out the agenda that we have, because on different days we're focusing on different topics and we have different speakers, but we have some great keynotes like Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who's a famous climate scientist, and she's an expert in how to communicate climate change. And we're gonna be doing a special breakout session with her that you can join as well. We're gonna be talking about food. We're gonna be talking about extreme weather events and health. So we have a really great roster. So we encourage you to sign up. And again, we have the special teacher code that's there on the screen, but I also dropped it in the chat box.
Thanks, Olivia. So there was a question in the chat. The symposium will be held virtually, all 3 days. So it should be able to be connected globally. So wherever you are in the world, we hope we can count on your participation. So now we've reached the end. We are going to ask you one thing before you leave, and that is to take our survey. We're going to drop that link in the chat, and the survey is really important to us because we count on this to improve our programs. Thank you so much for your patience. If you experienced any technical issues, we are so thankful for your grace as we continue to work on those. This is the first time that we've done a virtual teacher training. And so we continue to learn as we go along. So we'd love to hear from you all. So let's take just 2 or 3 minutes together and do this survey so that we can continue to expand this and bring it to more teachers and inspire more educators around the globe, really, because we have an international audience connected with us today. So we want to thank you again for your participation at CLEO. We are so glad to welcome you into the Teachers Network. We will send a follow-up email over the next couple of days with the recording, so you can reference back with links to things that we mentioned. Leopoldo also would like to share his slides with you, so we can share that link in the follow-up email. So I am here if you have any questions. We will stay on the line, but you are free to disconnect once you are done with the survey. Thank you and have a safe day, and remember to vote.